Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Kinesiology 234, and this is just a kind of a brief review of planes of movement. By no means are we going to go back to some of your early classes where we talked about the three cardinal planes and just wrap ourselves around those for this entire session. We're just going to touch on those for a second and move on. So when you look at movement, if we go ahead and take a quick review here, you might remember this picture, all right? You have the three cardinal planes. And the three cardinal planes help us to define what the basic movement patterns of the human body are. And you have frontal, sagittal, and transverse. But when you look at human movement actually is a combination, a limitless combination of these three different planes all working together. Rarely will you ever operate in one plane. I often describe when I'm talking with my athletes about doing speed, agility, and quickness. You know, if you're Usain Bolt or a 100-meter sprinter, you're sprinting straight ahead. But as soon as you go from being a track athlete and sprinting, specifically in track, to doing high jump, pole vault, or any activity that causes you to do any kind of rotational movement, it becomes a multi-plane movement pattern. A great example would be if you compare a bicep curl and a golf swing. They couldn't be more different. One single joint, sagittal plane, the other is numerous joints across the human body in multiple planes. So just kind of wrap yourself around that, and also wrap yourself around the concept that while there are three cardinal planes of movement, and then when you combine them, there are limitless planes of movement, you also have three planes of resistance that can be offered, but also multiple planes of resistance can be offered to suit the purposes of what you're trying to accomplish. So your resistance doesn't have to necessarily come from a single plane. It can be manipulated to suit your purposes as you see fit. So just for the sake of taking this through, we have frontal, sagittal, and transverse. We have the blue, the red, and the green. That'll help as we go forward. As a practitioner, realize when you work with your people, if they are a cardio diva and they are on equipment all day long and they like doing an hour of cardio before they come to see you, they are in hip flexion several thousand times over and over again before they come and see you. And that's all sagittal plane. If you look at these two individuals here, you look at somebody who's riding a bike, and many times when they get into more of an aggressive bike stance and they have the hands out on the handlebars and they're leaning over and they're doing hill climbs, etc., that's serious hip flexion. And they are in sagittal plane pushing over and over and over using, if you think of this in terms of, even if they did at 100 cycles, if you will, 100 beats per minute, you're looking in a 60-minute cycle class, right? If you want to take 60 times 100, you got 6,000 revolutions. That's a ton of reps. You have to view it like reps too, right? Every time you push down on that pedal, it's one rep. Push down on the pedal again, it's another rep. So just do that in terms of how many reps you're actually doing in a cycle class. And then you're in hip flexion over and over and over again. Over here, you're on this elliptical. And in the elliptical, you can see this gal here has a little bit of lordosis going here, and she's leaning forward. Again, that's an exercise that's done in sagittal plane. And you look at what's going on there with the knee flexion and the hip flexion that happens over and over and over again. Many times you have to adjust a movement pattern. Very rare, though there are some, very rare are the exercises, pieces of exercise equipment that take people out of sagittal plane, but they are there. When you see them in the gym, you get your people on those things, man, you get them working on there, and absolutely use it as a way to add some variety into their workouts. So again, think of strength training in terms of movement patterns. I often say this, get out of like the mindset of just exercises, and we'll compare exercises here, excuse me, for our example, but I want you to start thinking in terms of, okay, bicep curl suits this purpose in what plane? A torso rotation suits what purpose in what plane? A dumbbell side raise is in what plane and suits what purpose, if I can change my contexting there. Now when you look at this, you have the bicep curl, it's actually a side raise laying on a bench, and a transverse exercise that's going to be a torso rotation. It's a little bit of an off-plane movement because the resistance is higher, but we can go ahead and use that. So let me click. We can get these guys going here. Okay, so what I did is I dialed these guys up, and I'm going to start them 1, 2, 3, because anytime I start videos and I try to talk, it drowns out my voice. So I'm going to go ahead and let them play, and then I'll pause and get back into my presentation. And just a quick evaluation, when you look at this, sagittal plane exercise, single joint, single single joint exercise performed in frontal plane in an off angle because the person is lying on their side. Torso rotation, very transverse plane oriented, right? Those are exercises that are performed in main cardinal planes. Stop, enough, okay? You've had enough of a workout. So when you look at loading, it matters. And look at where the resistance was coming from in those different exercises. Two of them, the resistance was coming straight from the ground, but the position of the body was changed in one versus the other to affect how that feels to the shoulder and where the greatest amount of resistance was in fact felt by the participant. And then you look at one was performed on a dual action pulley, and the dual action pulley changed where the resistance came from. Now, if you want to make that truly transverse, that exercise would then be almost perpendicular to the torso. If we draw a line, down the nose to the navel, all right, and we go ahead and draw that line, we know that that plane and the resistance will be running perpendicular to each other. And you can change body position to change how that resistance feels, especially on rotational exercises, which we'll get into in the next lecture, I believe, we'll talk about how positioning matters for those exercises. Now, if we take this a step further and we look at these guys, this would be a standing chest press, 2 arms, standing chest press, 1 arm. This would be asymmetrical loading. It's a transverse plane exercise. It's your arms in horizontal abduction, and you're working in transverse plane, and you're offering resistance in that plane. So let's take a look. Oh, the drama. The big difference is because you're asymmetrical versus symmetrical, loading happens across the body, across the kinetic chain to make this happen and keep the shoulders square and not allow the torso to rotate. So in this example, you're doing a exercise and that exercise itself is in a particular plane of movement and the resistance is being offered in the same plane of movement. If we take this a step, okay, that's great. Get your workout there, buddy. If we take this a step further, and we look at this asymmetrical loading on a different exercise, now we have this pulling exercise and the elbows dropping down to the side of the body. So we know it's going to be more of a sagittal plane type of exercise. But as soon as we change this up and we go from, there we go, bilateral to unilateral, and there's asymmetry involved, with this, row, 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 we know that that movement pattern is done in sagittal plane. We know it's symmetrical and the resistance is being offered in the same plane of movement. If we switch that up and we go over here, because there's asymmetry and resistance is being offered on one side of the body, muscles, even though it's a sagittal plane exercise, muscles in the transverse plane have to work to be able to stabilize the torso. So again, you get to the point where you start thinking of, okay, it's an exercise, but it's also a movement pattern. And in that movement pattern, you're going to have muscles that are going to be the primary things you're focusing on. Rhomboids, could be rear delt, could be teres, could be serratus anterior, serratus posterior. When you start talking about back and the shoulders are articulating, well, of course, those guys are going to come to the party depending on what exercise you're doing. Push me, pull me, rowing, lat pull down, etc. But the other part of this is, with both of these exercises, the shoulder and the elbow are both moving. So as a result, because it's multi-joint, back muscles are working as well as bicep muscles. Yeah, you know that totally for both of these. And you're getting some stabilization in the torso here, of course. But as soon as you do this and you go asymmetrical and you have resistance being offered on one side of the body versus the other, now other muscles are being asked to come to the party to help stabilize and stay in this nice erect position, even though you're not symmetrical with your resistance. So keep these things in mind when you do exercise, because you can use these to manipulate and change the challenges that are involved with your exercise. And I often say it, you have other muscles that are asked to come to the party when you do an exercise. Even on a bicep curl, you have muscles in the posterior chain of the body that have to work to keep the person stable. So don't be oblivious to that. Kind of use this to your advantage when you're working with your clients and find ways to offer resistance as a tool to work things that you might want to work with your client. Okay, get a couple more reps there, big fella. There you go. Get another rep or two. Nice job. And so really what I'm after in this is I'm after you guys kind of wrapping yourself around the concept of movement patterns. Movement patterns require primary muscles to be involved with the movement pattern, but also secondary muscles have to work. And then you also have stabilizer muscles that have to work to make the magic happen. Beyond that, when you offer resistance, you can offer resistance within the three cardinal planes, or it can be in an off-plane resistance that hits different muscle groups differently. So start to evaluate your movement. And I know you're supposed to be working with your clients, et cetera, but I want you to start using some of these tools as a way to kind of integrate in with your clients and practice a few of these. Don't get too crazy, but just kind of think through how you can offer off resistance to a client to change how the resistance feels, how you can have them do an asymmetrical exercise to change how that affects the rest of the body, whether it's on one foot or one hand, or you're pulling with one hand while standing on one foot. Those are the types of little sneaky things that you can do with your clients to bring more challenge into the workouts. So with that, I'm going to sign off, guys. You have a good one, and I will have another presentation for you shortly.